Hello everyone and welcome. It's Coffee with Ceri. Hi everyone, coffee time. Okay, if you're new to this Coffee with Ceri, this is me just sitting down and sharing with you the world as I see it, and I usually choose a topic and I talk about it for a little while, enjoy a cup of coffee amongst friends. My aim is not to offend. I can be right, I can be wrong, I can be completely ignorant of the subject I'm talking on. It's just my perception of the world. So today's subject is aimed at the cake decorating people out there. Now, as you may know, I'm an internationally recognized cake decorator and designer. I'm also a judge. I have 5 books out there. End of story. Enough blowing my head up here. But I know cake. Okay, I do know cake. And I do have a subject that I want to talk about that always raises its head on a regular basis, whether it's a competition level, whether it's actually at cake makers level. And by cake makers, I mean actually anyone who makes a cake for someone else or their friends or their family, anyone who deals with the food stuff. So, and the subject is basically talking about what you stick on a cake. Now, obviously trends are trends, so you can go through different genres of what a cake can look like, or an edible medium, should we say, because it could be a cupcake, it could be a flapjack, it could be a wedding cake, could be a birthday cake, could be an anniversary cake, it could be edible. Let's go back to edible here. It could have been a chocolate torte. Okay, Griffiths, back to edible. Our aim is to make something that's beautiful for the recipient of the cake, whether that's your grandmother's 90th birthday, whether it's your partner's anniversary, well actually it would be both your anniversary, wouldn't it? Whether it's the birth of a new child, whether it's celebrating retirement, whatever it is, you want that person to absolutely adore what you created. And especially within the wedding industry, clients will turn up with this huge long list of requirements, and they've seen all these things in a celebrity magazine, and they've gone, well, Jennifer Lopez had this, and Reese Witherspoon had this, and they will see all these things and expect you to duplicate them and not want to pay for them half the time. But to be honest with you, in this country, in Britain, we have quite stringent regulations on food, and I'm quite happy about that because it protects both you and your client. It also protects you from being sued or lawsuits against you if something goes wrong or someone suffers from something because you've created something that's either injured or made them ill. So hopefully that's never going to happen to any of you, and if you're in business, please make sure you have liability insurance out there somewhere. You're playing Russian roulette if you do not. So what goes on to your cake? Now, a trend lately has been for putting real flowers on a cake. Now, there's sort of 2 or 3 groups of people thinking about this. Real flowers on a cake, it can be okay and safe to do so. First of all, I probably wouldn't recommend walking out into your garden, cutting a whole load of flowers and stuffing them onto your buttercream or your cake. Because firstly, you don't know what's walked over it. Do you have pets? Have they had a bathroom moment on that flower? Are there green fly? Are there aphids? Are there ants? Are there pollution that's dropped on that plant? How clean is that plant, and do you want to eat it? I mean, that's first and foremost. Secondly, do you know your plants, and do you know what is toxic and what is not toxic in your garden? Yes, there are edible flowers. Yes, there are edible leaves. But not all leaves and flowers are edible, and actually some of them are toxic and poisonous. So just be really careful about that for a start. Now, if you really want to use real flowers on a cake, you're going to have to do a couple of things. Possibly you're going to have to be really clever with this, and the flowers cannot actually touch the surface of the cake. So does that mean that if you've got a 10-inch round cake, you put a disc of acetate on it, so you put a bouquet of real flowers on it, but the flowers have never actually touched the cake? I'm not sure that that's going to be aesthetically that beautiful, and that still doesn't mean that if you've got any creepy crawlies that you've not seen in the depths of those flowers couldn't crawl out and actually creep down the side of your cake. Not a nice thought, not good for a wedding. It could be that your cake is on a stand and you have the flowers around the base of the stand, which is a lot safer option to do. So just be cautious. Let's not focus purely on the real flower situation, but it is a subject you really need to look into. If you're going to put real flowers on a cake, do a bit of research. Go on the internet, find out whether the plant is poisonous. Find out where the plant is coming from, because if the florist is actually giving them to you, have they been sprayed with insecticides? These may seem like, oh, that's a bit picky. No, actually it's not. There are people out there with allergies and reactions to chemicals, and you could kill someone, or you could make them incredibly sick. So anyway, we'll go away from that subject now, but that's one thing to think about. Cake jewellery. A lot of the time I will see like big diamante brooches and stuff like that pushed into the front of a cake. Did you clean the jewellery? Is it safe to do that? Have you at least wiped it over with alcohol to try and sanitize it? How are you attaching it to that cake? Are you just sticking it to the front of the cake? Are you making some sort of attachment at the back that's maybe got a skewer to it, that's a food safe skewer hopefully, that you've inserted into the cake so that it stays flush on the front? How are you attaching that? Is it a bit of antique or vintage jewellery? If it is, how long has it been around? Where's it been? What's fallen onto it? Now, you can buy jewellery for cakes from reputable cake suppliers. Usually that's sanitised, it's clean, it's made for cake. You should be safe to use that. And if there is any comeback on that, or anything happens, keep your receipts to prove where you actually bought that cake jewellery from, because you are not to blame for buying a product that you think is food safe, that was sold as food safe by a food supplier. The onus of the problem then goes to them. I mean, arguably they should say, oh, you could have researched that company. Who does that? Who actually does that? I don't. If I'm buying it in a store that is selling food safe products, I would expect the food jewellery, if it's made to be used on cake, to be cake safe. Next thing I see with a lot of cakes as well is if they're using jewellery, they'll use a big wide piece of satin ribbon or something. Satin ribbon is not manufactured in a food safe environment. Now granted, I am going to the very nth degree, but if you were to enter a cake competition with a real ribbon around a cake itself and it's touching the cake surface, I as a judge would question whether that cake should be disqualified because you've got a non-food item touching a food item. How would you get around that? You could back the piece of ribbon with a strip of parchment, a strip of cellophane. You could do something like that. Or you know what, you could just use the skills that you've got and make a ribbon out of sugar or modelling paste or flour paste, something that's an edible medium that shows another level of skill that gives you a completely edible piece. Because if you've got a satin ribbon around a cake and the bride or groom cuts the cake, the knife doesn't go through the ribbon, it pushes the ribbon, it tears all the decorations off the cake. If it's a sugar-based one, the knife is likely to cut through the ribbon as well. So that's that one done with. There was a trend a while back for wedding cakes that were from like the Roaring Twenties and flappers and things like that, and a lot of them had feathers on them. Feathers are a very, very tricky thing to use on cake because you can't really sanitize a feather, or if you do, I don't know how you do it. The piece that is actually usually in contact with the cake is the bit that's actually embedded in the skin of the bird that it was pulled out of. You don't know whether there's skin cells, whether there's mites, whether there's anything on this thing. So if you're going to use feathers on a cake, then for goodness sake, never push the stem of the feather into the cake. I would say embed the ends of the feathers into a drinking straw, or maybe melted chocolate, or there are products out that you can put them into, like a flour pick, before you put them in. But also consider the fact that there are some really nice feather molds out there. You could make a fully edible feather. You could make a feather out of rice paper and mount it on a florist wire, and florist wires are an acceptable thing if wrapped in florist tape and put into a flour pick to be actually used in a cake. Okay, so watch out for feathers, especially if you're using feathers that are dyed a different colour. Firstly, they're not dyed in a food safe environment. Also, if you have feathers touching a cake, so say your bride wants a white satin wedding cake with amethyst purple feathers on it. So you've gone out, you've found amethyst purple feathers, you've actually taken those feathers, excuse me a minute, you've taken those feathers, you put them into the flour pick, you put them in there, but you've done that on the middle tier and the feathers are resting against the top tier. The humidity in any room or within the cake could leach the colour out of those feathers, because it's a dye at the end of the day. Sometimes it's a spray on dye, sometimes it's a dye that they've been dipped into, and the colour could transfer to your cake. Guarantee that dye is non-edible. Okay, something else to think about there. Is there an alternative to using real flowers and feathers and jewellery? Yes, there are plenty of jewellery molds out there, incredibly realistic. I can't actually name any companies because that would be unfair to companies I'm unaware of, but there are some really nice jewellery molds out there. You could make the jewellery out of boiled sugar or isomalt, then paint it, and you'd actually have something that looks like a real piece of jewellery. You could mould it out of edible modelling paste or chocolate, and then paint it up to look like a real piece of jewellery. Ribbon, make ribbon out of flour paste, the paste you use to make edible flowers. Yes, you can use some edible flowers themselves, but you know what? You can actually make flowers. You can make flowers out of sugar. There are plenty of tutorials and books and veiners and molds and cutters and tutorials on how to make hyper-realistic flowers out of an edible medium. Now, there is a bit of a caveat on that one. Most sugar flowers are mounted onto wires that are then taped and then used on cakes. The wire and the tape are not made under food's standard regulations. However, they can be sprayed, they can be inserted into food picks that go into cakes. They're accepted within the industry as a safe option. They're called edible flowers. Is anyone going to eat that flower? I very much doubt someone is going to pick up this exquisitely moulded and modelled and created sugar flower and chomp on it. I have heard it done once upon a time, but really, you don't normally do that with them. Alternatives to real flowers, other than sugar, you could look at silk flowers. Now, silk flowers, again, are not made in food-safe environments. They're made in factories in whatever country of the world you want to buy them from. They've got plastic on them that's extruded or moulded, that's not made in a food-safe environment. All of the colours that are on these silk flowers are actually dyed, dipped or sprayed. Again, not food safe. So I would treat them with a lot of respect and try and put a barrier between them and the surface of a cake or an edible medium. What else is that? Silk, I think that's possibly it. I did have a list. I made a list. I think that's probably about it. Yes, guys, I am making a big thing of this because at the end of the day, it is a big thing of this. You're creating something that someone's going to eat. They're going to put it into their body. We're all hopefully very well aware of allergies as far as nuts and flour and that. I mean, the whole world of food has become very respectful and more knowledgeable about allergies and reactions people have. But there comes a point where you're reaching for something that was never meant to be used on a cake. And then that's touching that surface, usually for quite a period of time. And the chemicals within that could be leaching into the edible part of the cake. And someone's going to cut that, believing that you as a cake decorator have done your job properly and that everything is edible, and it may not be. So just be very, very careful. Okay, anyway, that's me off my soapbox on that one. It's just something to be aware of, guys. If it's not food safe, it shouldn't be touching food. End of story. If you're colouring anything, always check that the food colouring you're using is actually food safe. If you're going to use something that's sparkly or glitter, check it's inedible and also check it's non-toxic, because there was a bit of a scare a few years ago where we were finding that a lot of glitters on the market were actually being sold as edible, or they were using the word non-toxic and giving the impression they could be used on cake. However, they were ground up bits of plastic, or they were ground up glass or things like that. Hopefully that problem is now no longer there, but there are definitely some very clever products out there that will give you equally beautiful finishes that are edible. So anyway, I think that's enough for this coffee break. I will see you again in the next one, guys. Be good, and remember, think safe.